Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine to expand Russia, but while his troops pay a very high price to conquer small territories in Ukraine, in the West, Russia is losing 40% of its own territory in the East. 7 million square kilometers, almost the size of all of Brazil. That's how big the problem is. And I'm not just talking about any invasion, but one that's much smarter. Something that Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un are doing while the world turns its attention to Ukraine. And Putin? Well, he can't do anything to stop it. How do you lose half of an empire without firing a shot? That's what I'm going to show you now. In October 2025, the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service published a troubling report. The document says that Putin has become so desperate to keep his war in Ukraine going that he's eliminating his allies in a way he never imagined. With Russian territory, the Russian Far East, a region almost the size of a continent, is falling into the hands of China and North Korea. And the craziest part? Putin authorized all of this. But before understanding how we got here, you need to know one thing. China never forgot what Russia did. In 1858, the Russian Empire was strong, China was weak, and Russia took advantage of it. It forced China to sign what they still call unequal treaties to this day. With these treaties, Russia took huge territories north of the Amur River and took everything that is now the Primorsky region. That's how it got Vladivostok, one of Russia's most important ports. For China, this was never forgotten. It's part of what they call the Century of Humiliation. And in 1969, this history almost exploded into nuclear war. Chinese and Soviet troops faced off on a disputed island in the Ussuri River. It was bloody, it was dangerous, and it left a permanent scar between the two countries. Today, officially, China and Russia are strategic partners. But in 2023, China did something revealing. It published an official map where it placed the Chinese historical names on Russian cities in the Far East. Vladivostok became Haishanwai on the map, and Khabarovsk got its Chinese name back. It was a subtle message, but a very direct one. It's as if they're saying, we're remembering, and maybe one day we'll want that back. Now, let's move to the present. China is entering the Russian Far East in a way we've never seen before. By the end of 2025, Chinese investments in the region are expected to reach 1 trillion rubles. That's about $12.6 billion. Putin thinks he's getting a great deal. But China, well, it doesn't invest like that out of kindness. And here we come to an important point. Normally, China uses its Belt and Road Initiative to gain influence. The scheme is simple. The Chinese lend money to poor countries to build infrastructure. Those countries get into debt, and China gains control. It has already secured $22 billion in payments from the 75 poorest countries in the world. But in the Russian Far East, China is not following this pattern. It's not building ports, it's not making roads. It's doing something even smarter, creating commercial dependency. In Khabarovsk, a Russian region on the border, the volume of trade with China increased by 5.5 million tons in 2024. In the first half of 2025, trade exploded by another 36%. Viktor Kalashnikov, a Russian senator from Khabarovsk, admitted this publicly. The region is becoming completely dependent on China for trade. And when you depend on someone to survive economically, that person has power over you. Total power. China is building leverage. And when the right time comes, it will use that leverage to get whatever it wants. But investment isn't all. China is also extracting Russian natural resources. Timber, minerals, energy. Everything the Far East has, China is taking. And every resource that leaves is money Putin loses. Money Russia needs to pay for its war. However, there's something even deeper happening. China is changing the face of the Far East demographically. Up to 2 million Chinese citizens are already living and working in the region, between the Ural Mountains and Vladivostok. And most of them are there with Putin's full approval. They work without visas, operating in special economic zones. These zones are fascinating. They're areas within Russia where the rules aren't entirely Russian. The business laws are different, and trade works differently. In practice, there are parts of Russia where China is in charge. Stop and imagine this. Russian territory operating under Chinese rules. It's a form of silent occupation. No tanks, no soldiers, just people, just business, just control. But do you know what's even stranger? Putin could technically reverse all of this quickly. He has the power to cancel these special zones and expel the Chinese workers. But all signs show he won't do that soon, as it would cost him China's support. And without China, the war in Ukraine stops. It's that simple. Putin is in a prison, and China is not alone in this story. There's another player in the game. North Korea, Kim Jong-un, is also taking his share. He sent about 100,000 North Korean workers to the Russian Far East. These workers are building, extracting resources, and filling the void that Russia created. And here we reach a point that is, at the very least, ironic. Because in 2017, Russia voted in favor of United Nations sanctions against North Korea. One of those sanctions specifically prohibited the use of North Korean labor abroad. Russia agreed with that, but now it needs labor so badly that it's ignoring the very rules it supported. It's openly violating international sanctions. And Kim Jong-un is profiting a lot from this. Each worker generates money for the regime. It is estimated that North Korea is earning $600 million a year just from this work. It's money that goes straight to Kim's nuclear program, straight to his missiles. In other words, Putin is funding Kim's weapons, while Kim is providing the arms that Putin needs. And there's more. These North Korean workers are developing exactly the resources that China wants. It's a perfect synergy. The North Koreans extract, China buys, Russia loses control. Everyone wins, except Putin. But after all, why did Putin let it get to this point? The answer lies in Russia's recent history. In 2013, Putin declared what he called a pivot to the east. The idea was simple: reduce Russia's dependence on European markets, get closer to Asia, and gain influence in the Pacific region. At first, it seemed smart, but in 2014, everything changed. Putin annexed Crimea. The West responded with sanctions, and the pivot to the east was no longer a strategic choice. It became a desperate necessity. Russia needed new partners, and it needed them fast. Then, in February 2022, Putin launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Western sanctions exploded. They were the heaviest in modern history. Russia was cut off from the global financial system, its reserves were frozen, its products were banned, and Putin was left with no options. Only China was left, and China knew it. Look at what happened with Russian oil. Before the war, Russia sold to Europe at normal prices. Now it sells to China and India at huge discounts. China saved $10 billion in 2022 and 2023 just by buying cheap Russian oil. Putin sees this as a necessary sacrifice. China sees it as a golden opportunity. The Carnegie Endowment Center has a name for what's happening. Vassalage. Putin has turned Russia into a vassal of China. It's a strong term, I know, but it needs to be said, because Putin has nowhere else to go. He burned all the bridges with the West, and now, even if he wanted to distance himself from China, he would have no alternative. Carnegie is clear about this. There is no way out. And there's an even bigger problem behind all of this. Russian demographics are collapsing. Russia's fertility rate is 1.4 births per woman. To keep the population stable, you need 2.1. The fact is, Russia's population is shrinking. Today, there are 145 million people. By the middle of the century, there will be 136 million. And the war is accelerating all of this. Hundreds of thousands of young Russians have died in Ukraine. Most of them came from poor and remote regions, as is the case in the Far East, which we're showing here. These areas were already losing population. Now they're bleeding. And who's filling the void? The Chinese, North Koreans, and workers from Central Asia. In other words, the Far East is ceasing to be Russian. Putin doesn't have enough people to populate his own land. But Xi Jinping does. And so does Kim Jong-un. That's why Putin can't refuse. It's not just about the economy. It's about demographic survival. If Putin rejects these foreign workers, the Far East will become an empty desert. If he accepts, he loses control. There's no victory here, only different kinds of defeat. Now, let's do the math. Russia currently controls about 20% of Ukraine. It took 3.5 years of brutal war to get there. Throughout the entire year of 2025, Russian territorial gains amounted to only 1% of Ukrainian territory. 1%. In a whole year, 80% of Ukraine remains to be conquered. If the pace continues like this, Putin will need decades of war, decades of dependence on China and North Korea, decades paying with Russian territory. And China is providing the tools for this war to continue. A report from United 24 Media, dated October 15, 2025, revealed that China is supplying 80% of the critical parts that Putin needs for his drone war. Without these parts, the Russian air strategy collapses. Since May 2025, Russia has launched at least 4,000 drones per month against Ukrainian cities. Each drone depends on Chinese components. Putin needs these drones. He needs these Chinese engineers who are helping sanctioned Russian manufacturers. He needs Chinese money. He needs North Korean workers. And the more he needs, the more control he gives up. But then, what can we expect from now on? Where is this going to end? Well, there are 3 possible scenarios here. The first, and most likely, is the continuation of what is already happening, just at a faster pace. China will continue to deepen its economic control. North Korea will keep sending workers. The Far East will, in practice, become an extension of the Chinese economy. Russia will maintain sovereignty on paper, but will lose it in reality. The second scenario is the conflict between China and North Korea. If the two start competing for resources or spheres of influence in the Far East, Putin will be caught in the middle and won't have the power to mediate. He will be forced to choose between 2 partners on whom he depends equally. Any choice he makes will weaken Russia even further. The third scenario is the most unlikely. A future Russian leader after Putin will try to reverse all of this. He will try to regain control of the Far East, but will later find out that it's too late. The infrastructure is Chinese, the population mixed, and the economy dependent. Reversing this would require a massive mobilization of resources that a post-war Russia simply won't have. Whatever the scenario, one thing has become quite clear. Putin started this war to expand Russia, to restore imperial greatness, to put Russia back on the map as a superpower. But the result was the opposite. He created the biggest strategic transfer of territory and control in recent history. Not with tanks, not with invasions, but with debt, with need, with desperation. And while Putin tries to add 20% of Ukraine to Russia, he is losing 40% of Russia itself to China and North Korea. He is paying for centimeters in the west, with millions of square kilometers in the east. That's the brutal math of imperial ambition in the 21st century. Putin may never see the full consequences of what he has done, but history will remember, not as the man who expanded Russia, but as the man who lost control of it. And you, what do you think? Do you believe that, in about 20 years, China will completely control the Russian Far East? Leave your opinion here in the comments. And if this video made you see the war in Ukraine in a different way, share it with someone who needs to know about this. Subscribe to the channel for more content about geopolitics and what's really happening in the world. Thanks. See you next time.